The phrase "don't be evil." Remember we talked about negative versus positive connotation as humans? It is
Absolutely.
a completely negative phrase. Do not be evil. It starts with a not, a negative. It ends with one of the most negative words in any language, evil.
Absolutely.
So there is a constant reminder. I mean, this used to be, this was everywhere. I don't know if they like had it on their homepage or anything, but it was, this phrase was everywhere. It's known in popular culture. I don't know if it's like still there, but it will always be associated with them. And the employees that they built up this company over the years, yes, to your point, they obviously had that discussion early and at least recognized that it could go that way. And like and so I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. But the way they decided to implement it among their workforce was a culture of fear of what could be instead of a culture of hope of what it should be. And so it's like anything else. When you project something, you often become the thing you project, even if you're saying not to do it.
You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
No, really. And that's what I think about, because our first reaction is to assume all these people are evil. We don't know that. And that's the point. You can't say for sure Google is evil.
It's part of being a skeptic.
Yes. And like it's easy to say when it comes to like discourse and someone disagrees with the discourse that they may favor or something like that. They say, oh, they must be evil because they're shutting down the other discourse. That's not necessarily true. But when things are left unchecked, bad things can happen. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously we've pounded away at the argument of regulation versus free market capitalism. That's one thing. We don't need to hit that again. But it also then comes down to where is the greater good served here? It's so hard. It's so hard to think about. But you talk about like centralization. These companies, because of their reach, become their own governments. And yet, what's the one recourse we have to be able to fix them? The one recourse we have to be able to fix them is the one thing that can come above them in the pecking order, in the chain of command, which is a government. And what's the one thing that can get out of control if the people are taken out of the process and are forced to do what the government tells them to do, down to the individual all the way up from the corporation? The government. And so you are stuck between the shit and the fart here, because on the one hand, you can leave these companies. That's one of my favorite phrases. I say it all the time. On the one hand, you can leave these companies unchecked and say, hey, it's better to leave the free market capitalism and let competition figure it out. And you know what? Assume that over time, most humans are going to do good. On the other hand, you come in and you be the big bad government. And I say that like in air quotes, right?
Of course.
And you tell them no free market capitalism, which means where else does it go? And then once you take that power, in that case, you took power over the ultimate tech companies. What else can you take power of? And Bill, like I know in the past, you and I have talked about this with banks actually, and we don't realize it. One of my favorite quotes from the financial crisis of 2008 is there was a great trader at Lehman Brothers who ended up, Lehman Brothers was the company back in September 2008, one of the main investment banks that failed.
Right.
And almost ended the world. And then the government had to step in and bail out the other banks. Otherwise, our financial system, without going into the details, would have ended as a whole.
Right.
And so this guy, Jared Dillian, who was a great trader there, wrote some books about Lehman Brothers. Mm-hmm. And the thing about that whole crisis was it was a very limited number of people who were relied upon in the chain of command of a corporation where everyone has to do their job to do their job, and they didn't. And so his quote was, and I'm going to amend it afterwards with my own commentary,
of course.
But his quote was, there were approximately 20,000, and I may be slightly paraphrasing here, but there were approximately 20,000 employees at Lehman Brothers. Mm-hmm. 19,995 of them were really good people who were really good at their jobs. I'll amend that and say it's probably more like 19,970 of them. Either way, the point is correct. And yet, what had to happen there? Because a few people, when left to their own devices, did not do their jobs and did not think of the consequences and slippery slope proportions of their actions and effect on everyone else. What happened is the government had to come in with our money and bail their asses out. And when the government comes in with our money, to say nothing of the government coming in and taking control in a situation, what else has to happen? They have to create a deterrence. And they have to create a system whereby there is a level of control that the government previously didn't have, such that something like this never happens again. And why is that? It's because the government is run by people who are elected to office who have a job to do and want to self-sustain their own career, because otherwise, if they don't, and people are pissed off and people want heads on a pike, they get voted out of office. And so what happens as a result? What happens as a result is now where there were 3 lawyers at a bank in a certain room, now there's 30 lawyers. And where there's now 30 lawyers, there's 300 new bylaws or new guidelines that banks have to follow. And now that there's 300 new bylaws and guidelines that banks have to follow, there's 3,000 more things that falls back to the customer that's now inconvenient in their life. And when there's 3,000 things that fall back to the customer, whatever they may be, company, individual, whatever, that's inconvenient to their life, now there is all these downstream effects that makes people have less utility than they did before the crisis happened.
All because of a few bad apples.
Yeah.
Full circle.
It's just, I try to have hope on things, and we all try to see the end outcome, and it's impossible. You know, you can simulate this stuff, but there is, no matter what you do, there is a potential downside or a straight up downside.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to, forgive me for this, but I'm going to go full physics nerd here. All right?
Blast. By the way, for people listening, just to be clear, I may end up saying this in the intro when I give you the intro, so they may have heard this, but Bill, we'll get to some of his like full backstory, maybe today or maybe another time he's on, but as you can probably tell at this point, Bill is a genius, one of the smarter guys I've ever met in my life. He's like very diverse too. He's not a stereotype at all, but you know, by trade, he's a developer of sorts and yet another huge tech guy. I try to surround myself with people like this because they can make a baboon like me actually sound like I halfway know what I'm talking about by injecting real intelligence into the conversation. So anyway,
come on.
Go ahead, Bill.
Regardless, the point I want to make is, and this is a bit of a stretch for an analogy, but bear with me. I'm going to take this to the laws of thermodynamics. There are 3 major laws you need to know. The 0th law, the 1st law, and the 2nd law. The 0th law says that everything in the universe is constructed of matter and energy. The 1st law is that matter and energy cannot be created, nor can they be destroyed. And the 2nd law is that in any exchange of matter and energy between 2 areas, between the 2 themselves, etc., some will be lost to entropy, which is a state of
English, yeah.
It's a state of disorganization. It's a state of, or really, it's a variance of states of where you can distribute energy.
Can you?
It's chaos. For layman's terms, it's chaos.
I don't know if this is possible, but can you inject like a visual example onto these laws, or like a?
No, but I am about to go and actually explain it and make it make sense.
Okay, all right.
So to simplify it, the 0th law says there is a game. The 1st law says you cannot win the game. You can't make energy. You can't make matter. Mm-hmm. The 1st law is you cannot win the game. The 2nd law is you will always lose the game. You will always lose energy into the inaccessible.
What was the 0 law again?
The 0th law is there is a game. It's just the definition.
There is a game. You cannot win the game is law 1, and the 2nd law is?
You will always lose the game. So as we direct our energy...
So you... Wait.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to make sure I got it. There is a game.
Yes.
Because 1 and 2 sound like the same. You cannot win the game, and then you will always lose the game.
Yes.
So meaning they're basically saying there's no tie, there's only loss.
There is only defeat.
Okay.
You can get close to tie, but you can never fully tie. And so this
go ahead.
Relates back in the way that, you know, you've brought up in a situation where banks were operating in an comparatively unregulated fashion prior to the 2008 financial crisis. And due to the actions of 35 traders, there were legal implications. You know, we had to go in.
Derivatives guys and stuff like, or CEOs, yeah.
We had to go in and spend energy to, you know, look at these processes and make changes to support, you know, not only the security of global financial health, but also the security of our representatives in Congress and our lawmakers and, positions of authority.
And when you say we, I'm going to keep being clear here to make sure we're on track. When you say we, you're saying we the people through the representation of government.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying. But as we've done so, we've lost a little bit of our freedom that we won't get back. There's an increase in regulation at the expense of convenience to the customer. There is an increase in legal representation at the expense of funds put toward new products. There is an increase in red tape to access our financial services, to receive financial advice, to potentially propel ourselves toward independence and success. We've added litigious components to this process that absolutely come at the expense of our financial freedoms, of our personal freedoms, of our ability to direct our careers. We've erected more laws and by doing so created more chaos.